Uh, uh, Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to everybody. That includes the presenters, the participants, and the TIPS support staff. A warm welcome to everybody. My name is Garth Strachen, and I'm hosting the last session of the TIPS Forum 2020, which is dealing with regional industrial development. As everybody may know, the other sessions have dealt with trade and reform in Africa, inclusive industrial development, strengthening and building regional value chains, sustainable regional industrial development, low carbon and inclusive industrial development. And this is the last of the sessions, and it deals with financial industrial development theory, policy, and practice. I am informed by Baba that, and correct me if I get this wrong, that Bertha Bangara has unfortunately had to withdraw from making a presentation. And so the presenters are, and please forgive my pronunciation if I make any mistakes, no offense intended, mistakes with respect to pronunciation. Rodney Haib, Tabisa Poswa, and Everish Mugocha. We've got a little bit more time than we had initially because Bertha has withdrawn. But I want to suggest that the remaining three presenters stick to the, as best as possible, to the 15-minute deadline which has been set for the presentations, which would leave us a little bit of extra time for questions, debate, and discussion. I am simply going to hand over to the presenters rather than, spending time setting a context for this, and perhaps, as and where possible and appropriate, steer the conversation and the questions when it comes to that part of the forum. So without further ado, welcome to everybody, and may I, subject to correction from Baba, and by the way, a special welcome to Saul, who's the Executive Director of TIPS, and perhaps without further ado, to hand over to Rodney to do his presentation.
My name is Rodney, and I'm from Namibia, and I'm an economic researcher. And I was formerly working with an Namibia Trade Forum, but now I work for a private organization. So I focused my research on liberalization of investment, or unlocking investment within the SADC region, and using investment as a tool for regional industrial development and full regional integration. So let me just share my presentation quickly. The issue was that what ministry was looking within itself, it was always undermining its own role in terms of understanding finance and investment. Mind you, this is a topic which I myself had to learn myself. I had to teach myself what finance and investment is. This is not something I went for a training at SADC. They taught me what finance and investment is. It requires a dedication of learning the financial world, the investment requirements, the policy needs, how domestic policy environments can affect investment growth within a region. Well, if it's already a challenging topic at national level, how can it be not challenging at regional level, which requires quite a lot of tools, a lot of drive, and a lot of resources to implement? So in the snapshot that you see in front of you, in the blue, the table in blue, it basically talks about checking on the protocols, and next to it is the objectives of the protocols. So I've listed the objectives and then the monitoring mechanisms. For example, if it's on trade goods only, we are monitoring it through checking the movement of goods, the import, the exports, everything that is recorded at the level of the customs union. The industrialization potential is also listed there, how exactly each protocol can help in terms of growing industrialization. We of course know that goods is something that is always negotiated. Services is still being implemented, and finance and investment is something that was not moved too deeply, apart from what is also happening at central banks. And now that they're always discussing also about exchange, financial exchange, or clearing of money, and the payment systems and the payment associations and so on. Basically, what is most important at finance and investment, if you look at the third line on the table there, I would like you to check there. I've written the protocol on finance and investment. Under objective, I've said that it creates a conducive investment environment and harmonization of policies. And then the monitoring mechanism for that is to focus, the focus can be on the laws, which is especially taxation, remittances, common monetary area, PPP, which is public-private dialogue, partnership, sorry, and then FDI, foreign direct investment. The industrialization potential it has, it unlocks countries' industrial capacity, and it gives short-term and long-term investment potential, and it also it boosts investment confidence within the region as well. Because what is most important is that SADC countries collectively should boost their industrial capacity and confidence. So the three S's that I'll mention is safe, sound, and sustainable investment, which is what investors, potential growth, growth potential we would want to harness those type of principles: safe, sound, and sustainable investment, in order for us to make sure that we grow as a region. One thing about finance and investment is that it ties cross-sectionally throughout goods and services, because you need money to grow also. We can go to the next slide. The challenges that I have outlined is the cost. It is costly and it requires quite a lot of resources to push for investment and finance, harmonization of policies, and also to become an epicenter of investment. Secondly, it requires private and public sector cooperation or participation from private sector. Finance is cross-sectional and is part and parcel of all SADC-wide growth. It requires strong private sector participation, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who are helping, or who are the ones that are entrusted by investors. When investors come into a country, they look at the environment set by the government, but they also look at the capacity of the private sector that they are going to cooperate with or compete with. The third challenge is reforms. Investment and finance requires deep and continuous policy reforms at a constant pace, which brings about growth through integration. Fourthly, there need to be good dispute resolution and arbitration laws or strategies. There is a need for regional dispute resolutions. For example, South Africa has gone a little bit ahead of most countries with its recognition of investment or dispute resolution laws, and adapted them in, I think, from 2017 onwards, and also that they have also adapted the international arbitration laws. Basically, it means any investor has the liberty, and this should be also included in any trade negotiation, because if we look at the APEC or those regional bodies, they basically also or the TRIPS agreement, or how can I say, the Trans-Pacific Agreement, they look at including dispute resolution as part and parcel of that trade agreement. And if we could have annexed this also, but also not just to annex them, but to also execute them, it will bring a lot of relief in terms of inviting investors. Then the other thing is peer review. Currently, within the protocol, the peer review is a representation of ministers and central bank governors. Basically, the exclusion of the private sector from that peer review is not a good sign for investors. We need private sector bodies, we need commercial bodies also to be part of, and other business forums to become part of the peer review of this investment protocol as well. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. In terms of priority sectors, there are a lot of priority sectors which we as a region are sleeping. Basically, SADC is one of those regions that can be a giant. Looking at the FDI, which I will present later on. In the year 2018, I believe, South Africa collected quite a lot of interest when President Cyril Ramaphosa came into office. The commitments made on investments superseded more than billions of dollars. So for some countries, these are just figures that they just hear when it comes to reading of the national budget. We are not really in an environment where we hear a lot of money as South Africa has or can attract. Basically, investors, when they come into South Africa, they're looking at the potential and the reach of South Africa into the rest of the SADC region because of South Africa's footprint of infrastructure and footprint of retail and distribution networks, and as well as the role they have in terms of sustaining the logistical backbone. Let me make an example to South Africa. If they establish a shop in Namibia or a mall, the mall needs to be in an environment where it can be less costly for them and also beneficial towards their revenue. That means that the investment that they do also indirectly benefits them or directly benefits them as a country. Because if their business outside the country is sustainable, it means the revenue within their country will also be growing. So if I look at some of the priority sectors that need that strong regional cooperation, it is sectors like financial services and infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I mean like technology, systems, and so on. We need to push them heavily. Secondly, it's renewable energy. Renewable energy is something, I use the term regionalization, because when I speak about regionalization, my initial theme of the research was looking at what we can call made in SADC type of initiatives with different drive, with different motive. And it is like a trial and test of having something made in SADC for SADC, benefiting SADC, which is a little bit above the expectations of just member states. But in order to meet the expectations of SADC at a very quick pace, without them, SADC cannot move forward as a region. Renewable energy is one of those very important aspects. It affects production, it affects factories, it affects workers, it affects, it causes a lot of huge dent in terms of poverty rates. People are poor because we don't have sustainable renewable energy. So how can SADC regionalize this as a priority sector, knowing that there are many redundant funds, especially even funds of pension funds, unlisted funds available for that want to assist in this sector? The third thing is water infrastructure. It's very important for them to look at because it sets up a precedence for agricultural growth and food production and sustainability. How can the region together come as a body and also resolve this? Transport and rail is also the fourth priority sector, and fifth is manufacturing itself. Basically, I put a chart there just to identify how the region can go about and draft their priority sectors and work on them. You can proceed. Thank you, Baba. So now, how can we track the implementation of the investment protocol? I know a lot of economists will go back to the econometric formulas, but I have drafted mine in a more applied way. The chart basically speaks about the objectives of the protocol on finance. So on the left side, you see the current objectives. The 11 current objectives are listed on the left side. They speak to favorable investment climate, macroeconomic stability, cooperation in taxation, central bank cooperation, bank supervision, cooperation on direct foreign investment, non-bank cooperation, development of capital markets, cooperation of stock markets, anti-monetary laundering, and then the SADC Development Fund. The enablers for them, I have noted them on my own because I've taken the objectives from the protocol, but the enablers, I have mentioned examples. These examples are like, are like ease of doing business, incentives, investment mediation, and so on. And then also I've provided a timeline and also how it can be executed. You can proceed, Baba. The next one is tracking implementation of the investment protocol. There, the region can build, how can I say, a timeline for execution, say, and monitor each country and rate countries as per their performance, whether it's partial, mild, until we reach full integration. You can proceed. Let me just, because of time. Also, I've made some recommendations like special economic zones. It's very important if we want to grow, especially in terms of manufacturing. And these also need to receive priority information. We need also to look at triple Ps or public-private partnerships. We need to look at investment protection. Also, we need to bring on board unlisted investment into the region itself. And then we also need to boost more incentives. You can proceed as well. Thank you, Baba. I've given some foreign direct investment stats. On the second chart, we see that Angola has ran a deficit in foreign direct investment of $6.4 billion. In 2018, South Africa's investment was 77% of the entire SADC region. So that's basically also a good observation that how important FDI plays in terms of regional integration. The flow of money always determines the stability also of the region. You can proceed to the next. I think that's it. Thank you.
For the excellent presentation. I hope everybody can hear me. And I want to suggest that we move, rather than taking questions to Rodney, we have all the presentations and then we have questions. Please bear in mind that all the participants can post your questions for the presenters in the Q&A box. And as Baba has said, alternatively, you may also use the chat box and please use the raise hand icon should you ask to ask a live question. So colleagues, thank you very much to Rodney. Can we move then to a presentation from Thabiso Poswa.
Panelists and guests as well. My name is Thabiso Poswa. I'm a graduate trainee at the Competition Commission South Africa. Before presenting, it's important for me to just say that the views expressed here in this paper and this presentation are strictly mine and don't necessarily represent the views of my employer. Now, having said that, in terms of overview, introduction. Most development finance institutions operate across several countries, and they're also involved in different sectors, from agriculture to fast-moving consumer goods, but just across different sectors, both in the maritime and in the real economy. Now, if you look at, there's development finance institutions in America, there's multilateral development finance institutions such as the IMF, such as the World Bank. And you also find more continental DFIs and regional DFIs as well. Now, regional integration forms a part of the development strategies of many African countries. And they also consider it very important. Now, one of the reasons why regional integration is pursued by these different countries is the fact that regional integration can be used to promote economic growth and also liberates markets, which essentially leads to greater economic growth, human development, and the like. Now, reducing barriers to trade allows for the creation of new markets, new innovative products. I think the economists are more familiar with differentiated products offerings. Now, in terms of my next slide, now the background to regional integration is that regional integration is purposefully there to harmonize both political and economic regimes, and it shouldn't be viewed in isolation, as it has two arms, a political arm as well as an economic arm. Now, across the world, regional integration is pursued. However, there is no one accepted, there's no single accepted definition of the term regional integration. Now, institutions, world institutions have argued that multilateral free trade is optimal approach in terms of increasing trade. However, due to market failures, regional integration, continental integration, as well as regional integration has substituted multilateral free trade. Now, the SADC, as we know, was not formed right now. Occurred as a process of the formation of the South African Development Coordination Conference in 1980, whereby there were 9 Southern African states that were there to form the initial SADCC. These countries involved Angola, Botswana, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Swaziland, Tanzania, Zambia, as well as Zimbabwe. And this was formed, and it was formed from the Lusaka Declaration. Now, in terms of my next slide, if I could move to the next slide. Now, development finance institutions vary per institution, and each institution has its own specific mandates. But essentially, DFIs mobilize financial resources from the private sector and make them available for development purposes. For instance, like DFIs play a great role in that they're able to mobilize resources and undertake construction projects that the private sector might consider to be too risky for them to invest in alone. Yet these markets are very essential for the greater economic growth. Now, in terms of high trade costs obstructs the potential trade amongst African countries. Now, regional bodies have often relied on development banks to finance capital projects, and these regional bodies include the SADC community, the ECOWAS community, which is the Economic Community of West African States, as well as the East African Community, the EAC. And this is just to name a few and just give a summary. Now, the DFIs that are, thanks. Now to the next slide. Thank you very much. Now, in terms of literature review, Richard Wiener, 1950, postulated that trade effects from regional integration can either create trade, or they could create trade within the region and enhance the trade, or they could or as economies grow, trade could be diverted to other regions as the growth within the GDPs. Now, as previously stated, regional integration consists of both political as well as political and economic integration. Now, in terms of political integration typically refers to economic communities harmonizing the laws and the rules and regulations which make it easier for for economic harmonization and cooperation within the region. Now, in terms of economic integration is more centered amongst reducing tariff barriers, or both tariff and non-tariff barriers, but mainly tariff barriers, and just creating greater trade and free trade for regional participants. Now, regional literature has shifted away from assessing trade flows between member states, and now also assesses the extent to which regional integration undermines international liberalization. You might find that from a competition perspective, that access is granted, but at non-competitive rates. Now, in terms of my next slide, now previous studies have shown that small and medium enterprises in developing countries face barriers in terms of accessing finance. Now, development financial institutions can assist in reducing these barriers by granting access to finance for these SMEs. Now, the DFIs that I discussed in my paper are the New Development Bank, the African Development Bank, as well as the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Another DFI that I neglected to mention in my paper is the Industrial Development Community, which directly finances SMEs and at a more firm level. Now, studies have also explored the impacts of financial aid on economic growth and poverty reduction. Now, development finance institutions can be split between community development financial institutions, which are more popular in Europe, and which were more popular in Europe in the 1970s and 80s, and also multilateral DFIs. Now, multilateral DFIs that serve different countries as opposed to just communities, such as community DFIs. Now, in terms of my methodology, on the next slide, my methodology on the next slide. They said the methodology, the study undertook a quantitative approach to assessing whether development financial institutions assist in enabling and enhancing regional economic integration. Now, the model that was being used is the gravity model. Is the gravity model of trade. Now, in terms of the gravity model of trade, its underpinnings stem from Sir Isaac Newton's gravity theory, whereby equation 1 lists Sir Isaac Newton's gravity theory, whereby
Rodney, I'm really sorry. This is Garth. I hope you can hear me. You're going to have to speed up, please. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time.
Okay, thanks very much. Sorry. So Isaac Newton's gravity theory, whereby a force's dependence on the mass the mass of objects and distance between the two forces, which is in equation 1, which can be further economic translation gives you equation 2, whereby mass is GDP and distance is bilateral distance. And if you take logs on both sides of the equation, you get to the equation 3, which is equation 3 is. Now, in terms of my, the next slide, sorry. Now, in terms of the estimation results, the results that I found was that regional integration does indeed foster or does indeed enhance regional integration. I ran 4 separate estimation techniques: ordinary least squares, a fixed effects estimation, a random effects estimation, and a Poisson pseudo maximum likelihood estimation. I interpreted the results in terms of the Poisson estimation, and based on the Poisson estimation, we see that regional integration as you find that the the DFI figure is positive and statistically significant at the 1% significant level, which enforces that, which leads to the fact that DFIs do essentially lead to increased regional integration. Because of time, I won't discuss all the findings. And just in terms of my conclusion, more open trade can be realized through reducing the barriers to trade. Now, these must be both trade as well as non-trade barriers to trade. And the study recommends that DFIs not only invest in capital projects, but also assist SMEs in investments and developments. And thank you. And just lastly, I find thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thabiso. Colleagues, can I just remind you that there are 2 questions which have been asked in written questions in the Q&A function. And so the presenters who've been asked direct questions can answer those questions in the Q&A written facility, or in if the questions aren't to anybody specific, please feel free to answer. We are running behind time, and so I want to suggest, with everybody's agreement, that we move immediately to the presentation by Evarista Mogocha. Again, apologies, I hope I've got your pronunciation of your name correct. Forgive me if I haven't. Just introduce yourself, please, Evarista, and go into your presentation as soon as possible, and please do your best to stick to the timeline provided. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't know if you can see the slides as well as me.
We can see the slides and we can see you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Good morning, presenters, and also viewers and participants. So my study basically is on domestic industry production, lessons from a multiple currency and a cash budget economic system. So the idea basically is we want to look at what are the lessons that we can draw from a country which is basically using a multiple currency as well as a cash budget in terms of industry protection. And this can be used for other countries in future which might consider going or adopting this type of macroeconomic policies. So the basically roadmap is as follows. We're going to look at the introduction, a little bit overview of the country that we are using, which is Zimbabwe. Look at the methodology. Then we're going to calculate the effective production rate, and also going to look at the trends at a country level as well as across selective industries. Look at the findings and also the conclusion as that. So why is it important for us to look at protectionism as well as tariff? So basically what we see is that the literature of trade and protectionism is very important as it is basically linked to economic growth. We actually see papers which claim that except from Hong Kong, we see that almost all the countries, they basically had to develop their industries by more like protecting their infant industries in that aspect. So this basically makes this idea or this topic very important in terms of economic growth and programs for countries. So we have a lot of debate around protectionism of infant industries. Some scholars, they are for or protection, and some they say we should not protect our economies at all. So there is advantages and disadvantages of protecting, and I'll not basically go into the nitty-gritties of those issues. But what we can basically see is that protectionism basically can come up with some inefficiencies or rent-seeking behaviors, which can basically negatively affect the economy. And at the same time, it can be a nature for the growth of industries. We have seen it from empirics. And another thing that we also note is that existing economic conditions, like government policies, they can influence the success or failure of protectionism in an economy. So what we see in basically literature is that there's a lot of literature which basically try to estimate or look at the trends of industry production of various countries at various stages. But there's a missing link in literature. We don't have literature which basically try to look at the trends of protection for a country which is basically using a multiple currency as well as using a cash budget, right? So what we see is that these are two instruments. They're more like outer the normal kind of behavior of an economy. So when a country is using a multiple currency, you see that it more like tends to import the policies which were constructed in other countries. And also when a country is using a cash budget, you see that it's more like constrained in terms of how it can raise its funding to more like fund government expenditure and stuff. So you see that a country, in this kind of a case, has a high chance of trying to increase government revenue by using the likes of taxes and the stuff. And import tariff is one of those tax or avenues that a country in this kind of a situation can basically use in terms of getting more revenue as it try to more like behave in a normal way, funding its expenditure. So what we see is that there are chances that the levels of protection in this type of case will basically tend to change. So basically, we're going to add literature for a country which has this kind of condition. And secondly, we see that those are papers which are more like try to look at the trends of production. They usually use effective production rates, where they calculate effective production rate over a period of time for different industries, and basically look at how it is basically behaving over time. So those studies, they also fail to account for the components which basically makes the effective production rate. So the effective production rate is basically a model. We're going to look at it in a second. It has three main components in them. So we also need to find out of those components, which one is basically driving more production in that particular country. So if you can know that it can aid in terms of policing, makers they'll have an idea of what are the specific things that they have to focus on in terms of projecting or domestic. So basically the objective of this study is basically to estimate the effective production rate or using data from Zimbabwe, and then we're going to more like decompose the components which make the effective production rate to determine which one is basically driving more protection, and this will basically aid policymakers in doing their policies. So for data, basically we used import tariff data from Zimbabwe Revenue Authority. This also had to be augmented by statutory instruments. So from time to time, there'll be changes in the tariff policies, and they'll be gazetted in government gazettes. And so we had to collect government gazettes over that period, which is 1996 up to 2014, and basically like I try and to change or to adjust all those tariff changes which are being done or implemented by Zimbabwe over that particular period. And then for the import and output table, we figured out that there's a sum which is which was calculated for Zimbabwe, but it's a little bit old, and it also has some gaps in its construction. So we had to rely on some import and output tables from ORA. So it has import and output tables for almost all the countries over a long period. There's some methodological issues in how they construct that. But in the paper, basically, I went to length to explain how they basically get to those inputs and output table. So a little bit overview about Zimbabwe. Basically, we see that in 2009, basically the country adopted a multiple currency, where basically quite a number of currencies were used, including the US dollar, the rand, the pula, and other currencies. And also see that at that particular point, the government was using a cash budget policy in the paper actually explained what it is and the nitty-gritties around it. But basically, the government could not borrow at the domestic market or on the foreign market in trying to fund its expenditure. So we basically have a different type of economic system happening in Zimbabwe, and we have this table, which basically more like gives like a snapshot of the nominal tariff rates in Zimbabwe over these three periods: 1996 to 1999, 2000 to 2008, and 2009 to 2014. So in the paper, I gave it for all the industries that we have, but in this slide, I just picked just a few industries. So what you basically see is that the nominal tariff rates were relatively higher in the period 2009 to 2014, which is basically the period where we have these two policies happening together, which is the multiple currency as well as the cash budget system. And next, we look at methodology that we basically going to. So I used a methodology to calculate the effective protection rate, which was used by quite a number of papers. So which is what we have in equation 1.1. So basically, we have RK there. This will be the effective protection rate for product K. So it is basically made up of TK, which is basically the tariff, the final tariff for product K. And we have the A underscore IK, which is basically the input and output coefficient for the ith input used in the production of the K commodity. So we have a number of inputs that are used. So basically we have this summation as it looks at quite like in producing one product, we have a lot of inputs, which is what we are explaining in this summation, as those inputs are range from I is equals to 1 up to N, including all the inputs. And we also have TI, which is basically the tax component, which is being levied on those inputs being used to produce K. So this is how we calculate the effective protection rate for K. Then in the analysis, we're going to group this effective protection rate for across industry. So we basically see that in industry, basically we have quite a number of products. So we're going to sum that to get an industry average effective protection rate. And also for the entire economy, where we sum all the industries to get the average effective protection rate for the whole economy, and we basically look at its trend over time. Then in analyzing which of these components basically are driving this effective protection rate, we basically used the principal component analysis as well as the factor analysis to more like try to decompose these components in looking at which component is driving more the effective protection rates that we are basically getting after using this module represented by 1.1. So if we do that, basically, this is the overall for the whole economy, the average for the whole economy for all industries. So what we basically see is that from period 1996 to 2006, we basically have positive effective protection rate. In other words, like we see that the government or the policies for the government was genuinely giving protection to industries in the economy. But as from 2006, we basically start to see a huge drop in the level, in the effective protection rate as it goes to negative, right? So negative effective protection rate. Basically, what it means is that instead of protecting industries, we are basically like taxing those industries, right? Which is different from from when we have a positive effective protection rate. So a positive effective protection, it means that you're more like giving a cushion to those industries to more like protect them. But once we have a negative effective protection rate, it means like you're no longer protecting those industries. You're basically like taxing them rather than protecting them. So that's basically what we see the trend happening post 2006. That's a huge drop, and we see the level of effective protection rate getting to as high as negative 87.56 like that. We can also break the effective protection rate in these three economic phases in the economy of Zimbabwe. Why? Because from 1996 to 1999, we see that the country was relatively stable and it was using its own currency. From a period 2006, basically see that it was a different phase of the economy where we have an economic crisis with hyperinflation and a lot of challenges which were happening. And the period 2009 to 2014, we see that there was a relatively stable, but we have multiple currencies and a cash budget. So what we see is that in all these phases, right? In this first two, there was genuine protection which was being given to industries in Zimbabwe. But for the period 2009 to 2014, we see that industries were basically being taxed instead of being protected, right? If we look at a snapshot of some of the industry-specific effective protection rates, right? So what we see is that I took in the paper, I'll have all the industries, but here I just took a snapshot of the industries that were basically highly negatively affected by the issue of tax, of tariff. In other words, like industries which are highly being taxed, right? So what we see is that we have issue of processing and preserving of fish and fishery products, beverage and tobacco products, textile, footwear, the wood industry. We have also the building material. So what we see is that in the period 1996 to 1999, these industries, they had a positive protection. Same as in the period 2000 and 2008, these industries also were having a positive protection, except beverages and tobacco. But when you get to the period 2009 to 2014, we see that all these industries, they had negative effective protection rates. In other words, like these industries, they were being taxed by the system instead of being protected, right? So we basically see that over the same period, basically like some industry capacity-wise industries were not doing well. Probably this could be one of the reasons why industries were not doing well, like they were being taxed by the system instead of being protected. So in the paper, I go to length to explain and group all these industries that probably had same trends and this stuff. But next objective, which was basically to break down the components of effective protection rate, see like which components are mostly driving protection in Zimbabwe, so that when the policymakers want to change things, they would know specifically what they have to do. Like what I've said, I used the principal component analysis and the factor analysis. So what we see is that we have the KMO test, which basically shows the validity of using the principal component factor or the factor analysis given our data. We see that the KMO, which is the Kaiser Meyer Auckland test, basically produces good results to say that yes, the data that we have is basically it is valid for us to use a principal component analysis as well as a factor component analysis. So what is it that principal component and factor analysis tell us about these components, right? So what we see is that the tariff on intermediate inputs is basically had an absolute higher weight in driving the effective protection rate. Is it had a coefficient of 0.7 and 0.9 for PCA and FA respectively. And then it was followed by the input-output coefficient, which looks at efficiency, right? And then lastly, we had the tariff on the final product. So what this basically means is that the very thing that police should go for, if they want to change this kind of pattern, they have to first address the tariff on intermediate inputs, like intermediate inputs were being taxed more than the final product itself, right? And then police also have to look at how we can improve the input-output coefficient, which looks at efficient. In other words, like they have to look at how we can make those industries more efficient. And lastly, they also have to adjust the tariff on those final products like that. So we also used the correlation coefficient matrix to more like also try to justify or check the robustness of the principal component analysis and the effect analysis. And the results are more like a robust to that. So the correlation coefficient matrix also agreed that the tariff on the intermediate product is the #1 driver of protection effective protection rate in Zimbabwe, followed by the input-output coefficient, and lastly by the tariff on the final product. So what is it that we can conclude and recommend? So in conclusion, to say that from the period 1996 to 2007, domestic industry production in Zimbabwe was declining. It was positive, but it was declining, and firms were being offered genuine protection. And then we see that after 2007, industries began to be taxed, right, which basically is reflected by negative effective protection. And then we see that there were some key industries which were heavily taxed. These industries include the manufacturing industry of food products, beverage and tobacco, the textile industry, the footwear industry, the wood industry, and the construction industry. These were the industries which were heavily taxed with the policy or the tax system. And then in analyzing the effective protection, we conclude that the tariff on intermediate products should be looked into strictly if the economy should change in the path that they were behaving. So basically, we recommend that countries who would opt to use a multiple currency and a cash budget, they should more like adopt a pragmatic approach in terms of implementing this. They should be cautious on and checking every time on are they not taxing industries? And those industries, are they not the key industries which basically affect the whole economy? And this will have an effect on the welfare aspect of the economy, as well as poverty and inequality in the economy. So this is the end of this presentation, and I thank you for that.
Very much, Evaristo, and thank you to Rodney and Thabiso for their presentations. We've got a little bit over 10 minutes if we're going to stick to deadline. I noticed that there are 4 questions which have been posed on the Q&A function, and I would remind all the participants to use the raise hand function, and then I'm assuming Baba and Lesego will unmute the questions where there are oral questions which are being posed. So colleagues, over to all the participants to ask questions and participate. Just to remind everybody that the topic is financial industrial development theory, policy, and practice. Perhaps one of the context points is South Africa and the region, with some exceptions and positive issues notwithstanding, is undergoing a process of deindustrialization with very limited and perhaps even declining industrial financing, leading to bricks and mortar investments in the real economy. And so perhaps we should bear that in mind when we adopt a political economy perspective on this topic. But let me not constrain any questions and points that anybody wishes to make. So over to questions. Does anybody want to ask a question? Please.
Restore from Mbofi. May I go ahead and read it?
Please, Baba.
Is this not referencing your presentation, Evaristo? Is this not an indication that Zim policy stance is against regional integration? The EPR went down post SADC FTA. In essence, trade became a revenue-raising avenue rather than the integration tool we need. At some point, Zim banned imports of some food and cleaning products from SA on the basis that they were protecting domestic industry, yet goods are more scarce and more expensive now. How do we counter this and get more integrated? Zim is an important market for South Africa.
Very much, Baba and Mbofi. Evaristo, would you care to respond to that question?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. So I agree that the trends in the effective production rate, they more like indicate that they are against regional integration. But once we look at the policies that the integration policies that they are part to, even the bilateral and the multilateral, we see that the policies is saying that they want integration, but the calculations of the EPR, they are saying another thing. So I wonder if the system or the government basically knows what the trade policy is basically speaking, or what it is doing to industries compared to what they are saying, because it's more like a contradiction if you getting into more bilateral agreements with many countries, but at the same time you are more like taxing your own industry. It's more like a contradiction to me. But I think maybe it's because they basically don't know what the trade policy has been doing to industries in terms of are they protecting the industries, or are they taxing the industries? So I agree with you that if you look at the trade policies and trade measures that Zimbabwe has been implementing over time, it's more like not consistent. So at a certain point, they will open up trade in quite a number of products, and at a certain point they'll close. So there's more like that haphazard kind of implementation of some measures, which to probably are driven by, I don't know, other things. It could be politics, it could be other things. But what is crucial is that what those haphazard measures are basically doing to the industries, right? They are exposing industries to a lot of competition, and even more that the government was more like taxing. It was taking more money from industries, and basically industries were left at the hands of importing goods rather than producing the goods in the country. I agree with you that Zimbabwe is a very important market for South Africa, because if you look at statistics, it says that quite a number of, I think more than 60-70% of products that are consumed in Zimbabwe, they are imported from South Africa. So it is very an important market for South Africa, but not knowing that if these trends of exposing these industries remain like this, what will be the final detriment of this to the economy of Zimbabwe, though South Africa might tend to benefit from that? I don't know, that's the answer that I can provide for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evaristo. I don't know whether any of the other panelists want to come in. There's some useful additional questions that have come up, and maybe we could get to those. There's a very useful question that has been posed by Siraj Mohammed. Does anybody want to come in on answering any of the questions which have been put up, or follow on from Evaristo?
Hi, Garth.
Hi, is that Thabiso? Please proceed.
Thabiso here. Yes, Thabiso here. Just to add on to the important points raised by Evaristo, just like to just add that, look, on the points of goods being more, less goods being available and being there at more expensive prices, I think from a SADC point of view, what would assist is just more like a SADC, like regional competition forum or a regional competition regime. From my knowledge, there is the ECOWAS competition regime, of which South Africa isn't a part of for one reason or the other. But if you could just try and establish, say, a regional competition authority that could assist in liberating the markets and reducing the barriers to trade there, that would assist greatly in offering greater product choice, and also it could assist in driving down prices as consumers fight for, producers fight for market share. So that's just all I wanted to add on to that. Just a proposal maybe for a regional competition authority. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We're running out of time, unfortunately, but I think Siraj Mohammed has asked a very important question, which is what percentage of industrial investment is self-financed, financed by private financial institutions, and how much by state-run financial institutions, and how much research has been done on the finance provided to industry by private banks and other private financial institutions. I think this is a hugely important question, because I would venture to suggest that there's very little financing in general into bricks and mortar industrial development, and it raises a whole lot of questions in relation to the mixing and matching of public and private sector financial instruments to support the real economy, and what the processes are in relation to investigating and getting shovel-ready investments into key value chains and regionally integrated value chains is. So I think Siraj has correctly identified some of the key, perhaps, research follow-up that is required. But before we close, does anybody want to come in? Perhaps even Siraj himself?
I can.
Please.
The question is very important, but Siraj has to know one thing. Whenever you, for banks that are operating on commercial basis, there is a lot of data out there, which is, which we can find online about funding and loans. But it doesn't necessarily specify whether it's going for industrial development or just normal business activities. But he has to be a bit cautioned about when banks in SADC are identified as regional development bank or state-owned banks. That title itself kills the banking sector. I'm from Namibia. I know about seeing a public-related bank close. And one of the two reasons is, one is corruption and number two is maladministration. When a bank is operated as a semi-state bank or a bank with the initiative of regional development, everybody thinks it's their bank. So basically, I will speak very plainly and say, it's like nobody wants the limitations from a bank labeled as a public bank. Nobody wants a constraint. When First National Bank says, yes, these are the requirements we want from businesses, financial statements, this and that, they basically run away from such a bank to go to a bank that is labeled as a state bank and say, now this is our bank, you're supposed to give us the money. And when that happens is inside a region alone, I've witnessed a closure of many banks which were branded as public banks. So perhaps we should move more into how can we develop more stronger policy instruments for commercial banks that wants to enter into a regional space. And I think the regional space should be the one that says, yes, commercial banks, we have made a safe environment in terms of policy and also for checks for risk minimization. Then perhaps most banks will be willing to take that bold step. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Come in also.
Farai has his hand up. Farai, please.
Yeah. Just commenting on development finance institutions. I'm aware that the SADC DFRC, which tries to bring together the development finance institutions in the region, has been trying to find an avenue for involvement in financing industrial development within the SADC region. But one of the issues that has been discussed at some of the forums is relates to the laws that govern the operations of the development finance institutions, which seem to limit their ability to finance industrialization in the region. I think that's an issue that needs not just to be discussed, but I think it needs to be actually dealt with at higher levels, when governments actually meet, because the development finance institutions themselves, they can agree, but it's how do you practically implement these ideas which are coming out of the forums. But having said that, let me also just add my word as regards the issue of industrial statistics. I happened to have been working on a project that was trying to see how SADC countries could be capacitated in terms of industrial statistics, because to be honest, from the findings of the study that was done in this area, practically we can just say South Africa is the only country that actually has got reliable industrial statistics. All the other countries, maybe to a limited extent Mauritius, but all the other countries certainly do not have any industrial statistics to talk about. So when we talk about the industrialization, we should be asking ourselves, how are we measuring these things? Because we do not have the capacity to actually measure or to report on the actual situation on the ground. I just thought I should make that comment. Thank you very much.
Okay, colleagues, I don't see any other raised hands unless I'm missing something. We've also, in fact, not only come to the end of our stipulated time, we're running over time. Since this is the last session of the TIPS forum, unless there are any other very short contributions which anybody wishes to make, I want to ask Saul whether he wants to make any other closing remarks. Saul?
Thank you, Garth. Yeah, just to thank everyone from my side for attending the forum. Thank you to the speakers, the presenters, the moderators, and the participants. We've had a fantastic forum. It's been a different experience running this via Zoom and doing a virtual event, but it's, from my perspective, been highly successful. I've enjoyed the presentations. I think we've had a lot of really good, interesting discussion on top of the presentations and has kept people engaged. So I think that's really useful that we're keeping the debate and we're keeping the discussions going, even though we're faced with these unusual times where we can't have physical events. So I'm really glad that we have been able to continue with our forum this year. At some point we were thinking, should we just abandon it? But I'm glad that we've continued, and we've had really good participation and good quality discussion. You know, the presentations have been interesting, they've been insightful, and high quality research that has been shared. And it's allowed us to have some robust discussion afterwards, and even on the chat groups and the Q&A, there's been some good engagement that we've had. We are going to hopefully be able to have our TIPS forum in person next year. We assume that by this time next year things will be better, but we don't know. But we hope that we'll be able to have it. But I think what we've learned from this year is that we could also continue with some of the technology options, continue with some of the virtual interaction so that people can join without having to travel far distances, and open it up to a much broader audience. So we'll look into continuing with the technology options, as well as hopefully having it in person. We will start our call for papers in the coming weeks with the theme for next year. We haven't resolved which theme it will be next year, but we'll continue with the broad theme of supporting industrial development and link it to one of the thematic issues that have arisen over the last couple of months that we see as important and continue to raise awareness on. So we look forward to people presenting and to joining us again. And yeah, lastly, to thank the organizing team for their participation as well and for their engagement, making sure everything worked smoothly, stepping in with presentations when they needed to, and just making sure that the technology worked for us so that we're able to have a successful forum. On that, thanks very much to everyone. I hope you have a good day and looking forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks very much. Bye.